I started reading about dual souls, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I came across it in literature and through my own family. Western literature and culture really has been a driving force of two gender stereotyping. Native First Peoples, South Pacific Islanders, Filipinos, other people in other places that I have traveled to have a wider view of gender and sexuality. And only in the last few years has Western thought expanded enough to embrace a wider cultural worldview. I believe that it's truly important to accept all of us and not just the Disney princesses who fit the stereotype of the damsel in distress and her dim-witted but oh so lovable Prince Charming. Middle school and young adult teens are exploring their place in the world. And I think that if we do not show that there is space for who they are, what kind of a message are we sending them? There's no room for you. You have no value. These are the people that are going to be running the world. And if we are so busy boxing them into tiny little spaces saying, hide who you are because we can't be offended. And I think the big message here is this isn't about our comfort. This is about our compassion. There are 5 books in the series, and every book has people who scatter across the human spectrum of who they are and how they name themselves. And I fervently wish that every one of those characters gives hope to some reader who's looking in the pages of a book for a reflection of themselves. If I had any message, it would simply be, you're seen for who you are and who you wish to be.
Hey everyone, and welcome. I am Morgan Gist McDonald, founder and CEO of Paper Raven Books, and I have with us today a special guest who is launching a series. So if you are a fan of a good fiction series, you're going to want to tune into this one. I have with us author M.L. Dunker, who has been a reader for as long as she can remember, and when she thought the books didn't reflect the people who she knew and loved, she wrote her own stories. A reader and a writer with a desire to fill the world with acceptance and diversity, she truly believes the most important piece of paper anyone will ever own is a passport. Marcy, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We are super excited because not only is this a book launch, this is really and truly a series launch, right? We have the whole series of the tales of Zren, Janin, and it starts with book 1. A Gift of the Stars. And so I'd love for you to kind of open up this world for us. What's this book and what's this series about?
Sure. The Tales of Zren Janin is a coming of age adventure story. It's in an alternate world. It's got its own culture, languages, political intrigue, mythology. The first book, The Gift of the Stars, asks the question, a boy is found by the side of the road. He's about 17 years old with skin the color of cinnamon and the too thin look of one who lives on the streets. He's been beaten badly. Do you stop? The theme of my book is really a really old one. Many fairy tales and religions have a story of kindness done to a traveling stranger, someone who cannot repay the favor at the time. And so for me to make the story fresh and new, I looked at what happens to the life of the one who is rescued. What kind of a human being does it make us if we are able to help and do not help? And then what about the boy who is rescued? And then what does the future hold when you have no skills to succeed? If you've never received kindness before, how do you sort out the difference between friendly and friendship? Really, how do you drag yourself to the other side of childhood?
Yeah. And I love that you give us the questions that the book is going to open up for us, because I think that's one of the telltale marks of great literature is, yes, the great literature is a story that's enjoyable to read and also somehow changes us, like changes our relationship with people around us, changes our relationship with the world around us. And I love that you already, have in your mind's eye this journey that the reader is going to go through right along with your characters. And so in thinking about your reader, and I know that it's really important to your mission statement as an author that your stories are going to reflect the people that you know and love. Mm-hmm. Who did you write this book for?
I wrote this book for people who pick up a book and do not see themselves. If you read adventure or fantasy or coming of age, and I do a lot, the teenage hero fights and wins against unwinnable odds. They outwin, they outfight, they outmonster anything that stands in their way. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted to break the rules. I wanted a main character who doesn't have the skills and knows it. He learns as fast as he can, but he knows it's not enough. He's content to let others take the lead, tell him what to do, to drag him to the other side of childhood. He's rescued not just once, but many times over the course of the book. But I also wanted female heroes. I wanted disabilities and injuries that have lasting effect, no magic potion that all of a sudden makes someone all better. I wanted genders all along the spectrum. I wanted tears, I wanted cheers, because this is who we are as human beings. And it doesn't matter if you're reading this story in Canada, Kansas, Kerala, or Conrosa, we need to be seen in our books for who we are.
That's so powerful and so not just needed today, but really desired. You know, there's such a, we're seeing so many more people come out of the woodwork and say, you know, I want representation. You know, I don't want to be the odd person out all the time. There are more people like me. And we're sort of hearing these voices come up and saying, now's the time really for these stories to be more in sync with the people that we know and love. And, you know, even if, you know, we don't have the same, you know, gender discussions as someone else or disability discussions as someone else, that we know and love people who do.
Yes.
And so
yes.
we want all of us, you know, seem like we were wanting more and more of these kinds of conversations. And we want literature and stories, what we're consuming, what we're feeding our own minds to be a part of that conversation too. Interestingly, your book is fantasy, right? But the book, the whole series really doesn't contain swords and sorcery,
No,
you know? So how does this work?
Well, as Coanga would say, labeled, sorted, boxed, and buried. But the stories of Zren Janin is storytelling in an alternate reality. And so, for lack of a better label, alternate reality is fantasy. I wrote the mythologies first. The traveling stories of Zren Janin, the constellation tales of the islands, the Matasi parables are lifted straight from Christianity and retold through the lens of liberation theology. The Vicklander warrior stories are similar to the epic stories of the kingdoms of Korea, Japan, China. I deliberately tried to stay away from the Greek and Roman myths and the Norse gods. Other people have done those well. I would just be derivative.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it does take place in this sort of fantastical realm. And I mean, you have you've created like languages, you know, pulled in mythology, you know, it feels like we are truly transported somewhere else, which I think is the core desire of fantasy is to go and live in another place for a little while. I'm a fantasy reader as well. And so I know there's like this, you know, this draw to just experience something completely new and different, but also based in human experiences, human psychology, human relationships. So yeah, I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna do my best. Speaking of the you know, like new language and new vocabulary, it's always funny for fantasy readers. Like I remember, you know, the first time you hear someone pronounce a character's name that you've read in your head, you're like, oh, I pronounce that in my head differently. So I'm doing my best here. So Naguru. Let's talk about Naguru. Sorry, Naguruhu.
Yes.
Sorry. So Nagaruhu, what is that? What is Nagaruhu originally like sort of about? You know, who is this person?
Well, she was originally meant to be the hero of the story, and Red was only going to be my reliable narrator. I was lucky enough to grow up on Tamara Pierce stories of Tortal, and she is like, to me, the epitome of the standard I want to reach. You know, Becca Cooper, Trickster's Choice and Queen. But what's so good about her books, what's so strong in her books, is that her books are more than women taking on male villains and winning. She takes stereotypes and actually twists them until we see, you know, that is pretty crazy that's how we think, that's how we believe. And so what I wanted to do is what Tamara Pierce did for me. And the first stereotype I wanted to smash is that of perceived disability. Nagaru has vitiligo. That's part of who she is. And as she explains it to Red, it's just, this is a lack of pigmentation in my skin. In my country, it's common and no one thinks anything of it. But because of her life in Kerek and in Matasi, it's the perception of others that forces her to hide who she is. She cannot be her authentic self because of other people's perception. And Morgan, we all know people every single day who cannot be their authentic selves because of other people's perceptions.
Yeah.
The story Nagaruhu tells Red of the flower and the weed sums it up. You can call a flower a rose, a daisy, a forget-me-not. The flower's not going to care. But once you call a flower a weed, it means the difference between life and death. When we shove people into tiny boxes, when we demand that they live according to our perceptions and our expectations, we're only hurting them. We're destroying them. Nagaru is only the first person that Red is going to meet throughout this journey of the series of the books who embodies the importance of being authentic to ourselves.
So good and so true, and something that we sense but don't always have words for. And it can feel awkward if we try to put these situations together in our real world, but we can take people who exist in an alternate world, different species, different races, different worlds, and bring them together. We can really talk about it in a much deeper way. You're giving us kind of common scenarios and vocabulary really to talk about these things in a much more kind of direct way, which I think is one of the most important things about really good fiction, is that it brings us to a place where we can have discussions about things that have always been important, but we didn't quite know how to talk about them in this way. And one of the things that you talk about in the book is a dual soul. So Koenga calls Nagaruhu, and sorry, you're going to say them much better because they're your people, you know, that calls her a dual soul. Do you want to say more about kind of what a dual soul is in this series?
Sure. I started reading about dual souls maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I came across it in literature and through my own family. Western literature and culture really has been a driving force of two gender stereotyping. Native First Peoples, South Pacific Islanders, Filipinos, other people in other places that I have traveled to have a wider view of gender and sexuality. And only in the last few years has Western thought expanded enough to embrace a wider cultural worldview. I believe that it's truly important to accept all of us and not just the Disney princesses who fit the stereotype of the damsel in distress and her dim-witted but oh so lovable Prince Charming. Middle school and young adult teens are exploring their place in the world. And I think that if we do not show that there is space for who they are, what kind of a message are we sending them? There's no room for you. You have no value. These are the people that are going to be running the world. And if we are so busy boxing them into tiny little spaces saying, hide who you are because we can't be offended. And I think the big message here is this isn't about our comfort. This is about our compassion. There are 5 books in the series, and every book has people who scatter across the human spectrum of who they are and how they name themselves. And I fervently wish that every one of those characters gives hope to some reader who's looking in the pages of a book for a reflection of themselves. If I had any message, it would simply be, you're seen for who you are and who you wish to be.
And you had a line just there that really caught my attention. You said, this isn't about our comfort. This is about our compassion. And I think that is really calls us to courage in what we're willing to read about and think about and talk about. And one of the things that, Marcy, you are very willing to talk about in this series, in the Tales of Zren Janin, is racism, right? And so we have this really heavy backbeat, especially in the first book, A Gift of the Stars, about racism. Why is that?
We do. And Morgan, it was tough to write. It was very difficult to write. But I needed to show that it's so pervasive in the beginning of the series that even those who are discriminated against just consider it, that's just the way it is. Just everyone will treat me this way, so I just need to bear up. But I needed there to be a really sharp contrast when the characters can come to a place where they are accepted for who they are. It's almost like a physical release that we as a reader feel when we can take a deep breath. And by creating that tension, we can understand how chronic fear creates the inability to move forward. By having the characters act a certain way in books 1, A Gift of the Stars, and book 2, Manumina, they are bearing witness so that when the uprising comes in book 3, War and Wrens, we're all cheering for the action and the actors of book 3 and to the end.
Ah, that is so good. And folks, if you are here and listening and watching us talk about the tales of Zren Janin, and you're like, this is a book that I could really get into. The good news is that we are launching the books back to back to back. So right now you can dive into book 1, A Gift of the Stars. It's on special promotion right now. So if you go to paperravenbooks.com/A Gift of the Stars, it'll take you straight over to Amazon. Check out the ebook promotion that we're running right now. So you can go ahead and dive into the series. And the good news is book 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 are right behind them. So this is a series that you can safely dive into knowing that there is an end. The end is in sight. And it's this whole tale that will just, sweep you into another time and place and dimension. And I'm curious, Marcy, you actually wrote all 5 of these books before you really knew exactly how and when and where they were going to be published. That's a lot to write 5 books, not really knowing how they're going to get published. What was that like for you?
Well, I was kind of, and not to say that I'm like Tolkien, but I know that he wrote the entire Lord of the Rings series before he showed it to a single publisher, and that was back in the 1950s. I know that there are other fantasy writers. Michael Sullivan is one of them. He writes all of the books in a series and then publishes the set. What I liked about writing all 5 at once is that you have so much freedom. You can fix the plot holes. You can go back and change the ages of a character because you need them to be a certain age in this book. You can develop foreshadowing. You can change places where they live or anything about them. So by writing all 5 books first, I felt that I had completely told the story that I wanted to tell, and then I could start chopping it around.
I mean, anyone who's thinking about writing fiction, just like rewind this, hit the reverse 30 seconds a couple times and listen to Marcy describe this again, because Marcy, yes, I believe this is the future of writing series. I think that this is how readers like to consume series. We like to get into book 1 knowing that there is an end that is planned out and is going to be a great ending. And we're discovering that as writers, it is much easier for us to write a great series when we know what's going to happen. And I mean, to be honest, we don't always know what's going to happen as a writer. And so it is only through the process of actually drafting the chapters and the scenes and getting to know the characters that we come to discover what's going to happen at the end. And then, yes, we can go back and drop foreshadowing, fix little plot holes, add depth and dimension here and there. And so, yeah, I love that you wrote all 5 books and that we're able to just release them back to back to back. I think that is amazing. And there's a little bit of risk there because it took you a while to write the books and get them ready for publication. How do you feel about the timing, of like, is now the right time for this series?
I do. It's amazing how real life is paralleling what I wrote about. I mean, there's wars, there are pandemics, mental health, hate crimes, all of this. And not to say that I just took this out of the headlines and dumped this in the book. The books came first, but life is changing right now so much faster than we can cope with it. And I wanted to write a series in which the main character survives, but only because he has a lot of help from his friends. Helping one another, to me, is the foundation of humanity. And the characters in A Gift of the Stars survive because they help one another. The characters in Manumina survive because they are helped by others. And I think that's totally a reflection of what we see in the nightly news right now. There's war, there's mental health issues, there's hate crimes. But if we step together, helping one another, then we can all get through to the other side.
Yes. I mean, as you're describing your intent behind the tales of Zren Janin, you can feel that there's like an important mission behind the coming together of these stories. How long has this been in your mind? How long have you been thinking about writing these books? I guess, when did you kind of know that now is the time for you to sit down and write the tales of Zren Janin?
Well, I've been taking notes for these books for years. I mean, years. I have a day job that I'm lucky enough to travel. And so what I love meeting new people. Like to see new places. I like to try new foods. And as I would interact with people, I'd learn more about them. What are they passionate about? What's important to them? Where do they feel like they stand in their world? And so back in the hotel room in the evening, I'd write down these impressions. I'd take pictures. And over the years, I just had a lot of notebooks and maps and mementos and descriptions. And I would come home from my trips and I'd throw it in a closet because, we're busy, life happens. And then in 2019, I had an opportunity to just kind of slow down, just mentally slow down. And then I couldn't travel, I couldn't read, so I couldn't consume these books that I like to binge read. So first, I just organized my sock drawer because that's the kind of person I am. I'm totally OCD. And then I cleaned out my closet with all my notebooks. And then as I was going through those and I'm reading them, and I'm going, this is ready to write. I am ready for this. And so now I realize that now was the time to put it together. So even though I've been collecting material for years and years and years, it took about 2.5 years to write the 5 books.
So that sounds terrifying to most writers. The idea of a closet full of notes, because if we were honest, most of us have either an actual closet full of notes or so many ideas in our heads that we feel like if we started writing them all out, it would become a closet full of notes. And so it's terrifying because we're thinking, well, how do I write this in a coherent, cohesive fashion that the reader is going to enjoy? So I'm curious, what was your writing process look like once you pulled all the notes out of the closet?
Well, I needed help trying to figure out what was important and what wasn't important. So I started by writing the mythologies of the countries because that was where my heart was. I wanted to try to kind of figure out what are these countries like. And then I built out the framework on Wattpad. And for me, Wattpad is amazing because I got great live feedback as the story went along. And I know that the story that I actually hung in Wattpad is very different than what I actually finished up with, but it was because of the learning process. I knew I was seeing a lot of action in my head that wasn't getting on paper because I knew my characters' motivations. I knew what country they were from and why they spoke a certain way or why they acted a certain way. But by not sharing that in the storyline, my feedback from my audience was, they're so random. So I was able to really start reeling that material in, and I started writing backstories. And for me, backstories work because it helped define them. It's a critical piece for me. I didn't care if it got into the book, and most of the materials didn't. They either became short stories or they're just sitting aside, filling out the character for me in my head. But it was able to really build out who the characters needed to be. And I did the same thing with lots and lots of dialogue exercises to try to figure out, okay, if this person is coming from this country and they're speaking in this language, they're going to have awkwardness, there's going to be misunderstandings. And some of that moved the plots along, some of it held the plots back. So it was a matter of sorting that all out and trying to figure out what was the right time to say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Or if there were characters who were illiterate, were they defensive about their literacy or did they hide it? And then that had its own issues and implications in the interactions.
Okay, so you had the closet full of notes, you had the mythology, you started publishing on Wattpad and getting reader feedback and realizing you needed the character backstory, and then the dialogue exercises to figure out how they talk. You also had a day job. When did you do the writing? All this is happening 2.5 years.
Exactly. Well, I'm a morning person. And I mean by morning person, I write every day from 4:30 in the morning until 7:30. And I try to get however many thousands of words in, or 1,000. Let's be blunt. Some mornings are not as good. I try to leave the action really open-ended so that when I step away and, shower and get ready and go to work, that part is set up for me so that when I can come home in the evening, I can jump right back into the story and go over what I wrote in the morning. So the what I call good writing usually happens in the morning because that's when I'm strong and the freshest. And then in the evening, it's more reading it over and then saying, oh, and then what happened? And then what happened? And I can be either just writing snippets of dialogue or little bits of action, or introduce a new character and what does that person look like or act like. But the point is that when I'm going to sleep, all that's still muddling about in my head, and then I dreamt a lot of the story. And then the next morning I would just wake up and then, carry that dream as carefully as I could over to my notebooks or my computers, and then just quickly write down as much as I could. Thankfully, my husband is a night person, so we were not overlapping. I could have quite a bit written before I even disrupted his world.
Well, I love that you kind of created this rhythm. And Hemingway used to say that he would stop writing before he finished the sentence that he was writing, so that it felt like he needed to come back, and finish that sentence. You're kind of setting up a similar feel here, where it's like, okay, I've started the scene. I'm going to leave it off right when I'm getting to the action, so I don't have to make those decisions just yet. Let it roll around in your brain during the day while you're working, and then come back in the evening and go back into that scene, and then letting the decision making sort of come through your dream cycle as well. So you've got this like nice rhythm. Did you like, I guess you just created that over time, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
I just came to know that rhythm. It's a good one, folks. Steal it. So Marcy, if you were to go back to a younger version of yourself, when you knew you were going to write a book, but hadn't been through this whole process, hadn't discovered your rhythms yet, what would you tell yourself now that maybe you didn't know then?
The best writing advice that I will ever give is find first readers that do not have trouble giving criticism. For me, that was Wattpad, and it was wonderful because it was anonymous enough that people felt comfortable because they didn't know me. They only knew the story. And so they could tell me the hard truths. My whole intention when I first started writing is I wanted a female hero. I wanted the book to be about Nagaruhu. And the feedback I kept getting back was saying, no, she's really, really important. But if you want the main character to be about someone who needs help, and that was my main premise, it could not be another woman who needed rescuing. And I agreed completely. I didn't want to write a book about a damsel in distress. So then I rewrote it with Red as the main character, and then titled the book A Gift of the Stars after Nagaruhu. And she is a really important part of all of the books. She's a really important part of Red's life. And I hope she is quite the example and hero to people who read the book.
I just want to acknowledge you for having the ability to let that criticism in and to consider it and to say, maybe they're right. And then to be willing to go and rewrite the story. A lot of us, we wouldn't be willing to let the conversation go that far. We would say, no, this is my story. This is how it's going to be. But you're right. The two premises, the wanting Nagaruhu to be a strong female character and wanting to have a discussion about the importance of needing help, mm-hmm. They were at odds. And you sort of swallowed that tough criticism and said, okay, let's go back and let's fix this. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Okay, so why should people buy A Gift of the Stars? Why should people go and download A Gift of the Stars, which of course they're going to do when they go to paperhavenbooks.com/A Gift of the Stars, or click the link next to this video. Why should they do that, Marcy?
Well, we have so many books that are adult nonfiction, and that they're telling us how to find joy, to become a leader, even how to teach compassion. But I think that the message at the adult level is, it's not too late, because we all need to hear that message over and over again, but we need to start earlier. And teens read to escape. So instead of packaging it up into a tidy little nonfiction book for teens on how to adult, let's look at what they read, and we read to escape. Swords and sorcery are fun. Meet cutes and frenemies to lovers have their place, but sometimes we all just want to curl up and read about a place that's on the other side of the rainbow. And I want my books to fill up that space.
So good. So good. Okay. So how would people know if they like this book? So sometimes it's helpful to play kind of a little game, like if you like this, then you'll like this. So if you like Holly Black's Tithe, then you'll like A Gift of the Stars. So how else could we fill this out?
Exactly. If you like Tamara Pierce's World of Turtal, then you'll like the Tales of Zren Janin. And if you like Patrick Rufus, The Name of the Wind, you'll like Manumina. If you like Shadow Knights, then you'll like Warren Wrens. And that's the third book that's coming along in the series.
Perfect. So if you know those names, Holly Black, Tamara Pierce, Name of the Wind, Shadow Knights, these like epic fantasies with real meat and discussion and just life-changing characters who you're going to come to know and love, and who are going to change you in ways that you can't even foresee yet. This is the book for you. This is the series for you. So good news is A Gift of the Stars is done. It is out. It is released. It's on ebook. It's on paperback. It's on hardcover. However you like to read the book, you can go to paperhavenbooks.com/A Gift of the Stars. Check out the promotion that we're running right now. The audiobook is coming, so that might even be up by the time that you are seeing this. And you can go to Marcy's website. What is your website again? Is it mldunker.com?
mldunker.com. Yes.
Go to mldunker.com. You can see all the 5 books that are coming out, get updates as they're coming out. The second book is right on its heels, and then the third, fourth, and fifth. So this is true kind of epic fantasy series that you guys are going to love. So Marcy, any last words for our readers?
I just hope you enjoy them. I really poured my heart into them, and I hope that you enjoy them.
They are going to be folks' new favorite fantasy series. That's what I believe. So if you're looking for a new series that is done and complete and a really great read, go ahead and grab A Gift of the Stars, paperhavenbooks.com/A Gift of the Stars, and know that all the rest are coming out back to back to back. So you'll be able to enjoy all of them this year. All right. Thank you, Marcy, for being here. Thank you for writing these books, and we will see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you for having me.